If you're new to Ask Reddit cheating drama, make sure to subscribe and like the video. It only takes a few seconds, but it really motivates us to create more crazy cheating stories. They say when a heart breaks, it doesn't make a sound, but mine did. It cracked in the quiet between bedtime stories and unanswered texts. It bled in the space between cold dinners and colder glances. It didn't happen all at once, not like the movies. No dramatic betrayal, no hotel room confrontation, just a slow, steady unraveling. Thread by thread, truth by truth. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who once believed that love was enough, that loyalty could save us, that holding on harder meant you were strong. I was wrong. This is not a story about revenge. It's not even a story about him. It's a story about what comes after the lies, after the silence, after the shattering, about who you become when the person you trusted most becomes the one who wounds you deepest. It's about picking up your children with one hand, your dignity with the other, and learning how to rebuild a life where you no longer have to shrink to survive. This is what healing looks like. Messy, quiet, defiant. And if you've ever looked at someone you loved and realized they were the storm, not the shelter, this story is for you. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen like a warm lie. Lily was humming while packing her backpack. Sophie, still in her pajamas, was trying to convince me that she didn't technically need to wear socks to school. Across the granite island, Brian sat in his usual chair, blue mug in hand, scrolling through the news like the world hadn't shifted beneath our feet. He leaned over to kiss my cheek before grabbing his keys. "I'll try to be back early," he said. "Sure," I smiled reflexively. That's what we'd become. Reflexes and routines. He was already out the door before I could say, "Don't bother." The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was absence, the kind that settles into your bones before your brain catches up. I rinsed the plates, but I wasn't really washing dishes. I was rewinding, replaying every look, every delayed text, every night he came home smelling like a scent that didn't belong to us. Brian hadn't touched me in 2 months, not the kind of touch that meant anything. A hand on the back when passing by, a forehead kiss like you give a child or a dying relative, but not the kind of touch that reminds you you're wanted, desired, seen. 2 months ago, I told myself it was stress, work, bills, the kids. We'd fix it on that weekend trip we never took. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter. The cinnamon smell was still lingering, homemade, from scratch, because I still tried. I still showed up. But I couldn't remember the last time he even noticed. Sophie ran in, her tiny arms flung around my legs. "Mommy, I love your buns!" I laughed, startled by her timing. "Thanks, sweet pea, but let's call them cinnamon rolls, okay?" She giggled and ran off to grab her coat, shouting, "Lily, Mommy's buns are amazing!" I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes, because beneath the sugar and flour, something else had been baking for months. Doubt. And that morning, with the sun slanting through the blinds and 2 kids too young to see what was slipping through the cracks, I finally admitted it to myself. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you can fix with sex or counseling or a new dress. The kind of wrong that had already happened. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of quiet, forgettable day that doesn't deserve to be the beginning of an unraveling, but becomes it anyway. I was folding laundry in our bedroom, the kind of mindless chore that gives your brain too much room to wander. Lily was upstairs on her tablet, Sophie drawing flowers with sun-sized petals in the living room. Brian's phone buzzed on the nightstand, 2 short, sharp vibrations. He had left it behind while he took a shower. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Not because I was suspicious, because I was tired of feeling like a ghost in my own home. The screen lit up, and I caught the name, Alyssa. I blinked. Then, without thinking, I picked it up. My hands were steady, but something in my chest dropped like a pebble in a well. The message read, "Last night was unreal. You still smell like me." I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Just stood there, phone in hand, surrounded by socks and folded jeans, and the hum of the shower in the background. The second message came seconds later. I can't stop thinking about your hands. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the soft duvet swallowing me like fog. So it wasn't in my head. The distance, the coldness, the mechanical affection, the missing touches, the business trips that got extended, the sudden interest in cologne he never used to wear. It was all real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't hormonal. I wasn't overthinking. He was cheating on me. The water stopped. I looked toward the bathroom door, the steam already curling out beneath it like a silent witness. I had 3 seconds to decide, put the phone back, pretend I never saw it, or confront him. Instead, I did nothing. I placed the phone down slowly, like setting a trap I wasn't ready to spring. Brian walked out, towel around his waist, hair damp, fresh from a shower that washed everything but guilt. He smiled casually. Girls behaving? Like angels, I said, my voice even, too even. My body had already chosen. Not now, not yet. Because something inside me whispered that this was only the beginning. And if I was going to burn, I wanted to see everything first. He kissed my forehead on his way out of the room. I didn't flinch, I just stared at his phone. And for the first time in our 12 years of marriage, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. It was supposed to be a harmless neighborhood gathering. A potluck in the Johnsons' backyard, plastic chairs, string lights, kids chasing bubbles, and adults pretending not to resent each other's success. Brian insisted we go. It'll be good for you, he said, like I was some injured pet that needed socialization. I didn't want to go, but I did. I wore a navy blue blouse he used to say brought out my eyes. He didn't notice. Lily wore her favorite Converse. Sophie brought her stuffed rabbit. Brian wore a smile like it was freshly ironed. We walked over as a family. We left as strangers. The Johnsons' yard was already crowded. Men clustered around the grill talking football and Teslas. Women in sundresses laughed a little too hard over boxed wine and unspoken competition. The kids ran wild, shoeless, and sticky with juice. Brian beelined to a group near the bar cart like he couldn't wait to stop standing next to me. I stood by the lemonade, holding a paper plate I didn't want to fill. That's when she showed up. Alyssa. I didn't need an introduction. Red lips, perfect hair, a laugh that turned heads. And when she looked at Brian, just for a second, his face changed. It was subtle, but it was there. That flicker of recognition, that too-fast smile, that soft exhale like her presence gave him permission to breathe again. And suddenly, everything made sense. I watched them from across the yard like I was outside my own life, a voyeur to the crumbling of something I once called sacred. She walked over, right to me. Hi, Emily, right? Her voice was sugar with a razor edge. I'm Alyssa, Brian's coworker. I smiled, not because I wanted to, but because that's what women like me are taught to do when facing the wolves in lipstick. Nice to meet you, I said. I didn't blink. She reached for a deviled egg. He talks about you all the time. I bet he does. Brian sauntered over then, holding 2 drinks. He handed one to her. Not me. I stared at him, stared through him, and for the first time I realized something terrifying. He wasn't even ashamed. He wasn't trying to hide it. He wanted me to know. There's a kind of cruelty in that, the kind that doesn't come from lust, but from detachment. From the moment someone stops seeing you as real. Later that night, after the kids had fallen asleep and he was snoring on the couch like he hadn't betrayed me with every nerve in his body, I sat at the edge of the bed and wrote her name down in my journal. Not to remember her, but to remember how it felt. The humiliation, the restraint, the moment I realized I was not the one losing something. He was. I used to think heartbreak was loud, like plates shattering, screams. Doors slammed hard enough to rattle frames, but it's not. Not really. It's quiet. It's brushing your teeth beside someone who doesn't look at you anymore. It's making coffee for a man who's already drunk someone else's name. It's silence, disguised as normal. That night, I stood in the bathroom, staring into the mirror while the house slept. I looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes, The kind that sinks into your bones, that rewrites your face when you're not looking. My eyes had lost their sparkle, the one Brian used to tease me about. My skin looked a little dull. My mouth didn't curve the way it used to. It was like my body knew before my mind caught up. I touched my own reflection gently, tracing the lines by my eyes. "Where did you go?" I whispered to myself. There was a time I lit up every room I walked into. I remember that girl. The one who danced in the kitchen with pancake batter on her shirt. The one who wrote poetry on napkins and believed in growing old with one person. The one who loved so hard, she forgot to check if it was safe. I hadn't seen her in a while. Instead, I'd become Emily the wife, Emily the mom, Emily the reason he stayed. And now, I wasn't even sure he was staying. I walked back into our bedroom, the one we picked out together 10 years ago when we moved into this house with nothing but student loans and hope. The same room where we made promises in the dark. The same bed where he whispered dreams and slowly, one by one, stopped meaning any of them. He stirred but didn't wake. His phone lit up on the nightstand. No message this time. But I didn't need one. I already knew the truth. And here's the thing about truth. It doesn't need proof. It sits in your chest like lead. It leaks into your bloodstream and changes the way you breathe. I lay down beside him, inches away, yet galaxies apart. And I promised myself something. Not revenge, not drama, not some movie-style redemption arc. Just this. I would not disappear quietly. I would find the girl I used to be, even if I had to burn everything to the ground just to light the way. There's something strangely intimate about unlocking someone's secrets, not with a scream, not with a confrontation, but with a quiet, calculated hand. It was Thursday afternoon. Sophie was at a play date. Lily had soccer practice. Brian had left early for a late meeting downtown, one of those vague phrases that used to mean nothing, but now meant everything. I stood alone in our bedroom, the autumn light soft against the curtains, and stared at his nightstand drawer. He always kept it locked. But Brian, like most men who cheat, wasn't careful enough. The key was taped to the bottom of his cologne bottle. I found it 2 days ago. I waited. I wanted to be sure I was ready for whatever was inside. Turns out, I wasn't. Inside, there were letters. Old cards I'd written him. Anniversary notes, sticky Post-its I'd left in his lunch when we were broke and in love and still believed in forever. He hadn't thrown them away, just tucked them away next to something else entirely. A burner phone. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the kind of phone you see in movies, no blacked-out screen or ominous ringtone. Just a cheap Android, slightly scratched, and full of things I can't ever unsee. Photos, messages, videos, her face, her lips, her hands on his chest, their bodies tangled in the sheets I'd washed 3 times a week. Our sheets, our bed. One video was only 6 seconds long. She laughed and whispered, "She has no idea, and that's what makes it hot." I dropped the phone like it burned. Maybe it did. I sat down on the edge of the bed, my knees weak, my chest full of cement. My hands were trembling. Not from rage, not even from betrayal, but from clarity. Because now it wasn't about suspicion or gut instinct, it was fact. He didn't just betray me, he enjoyed hiding it. He thrived in the deception. And worse? He brought it into our home, into the air our daughters breathe, into the walls we painted together, into the place I still called safe. I stood up, slowly. The mirror across the room caught my reflection again. I looked different this time. Not broken, not tear-stained, not defeated, just awake. I picked up the phone and took screenshots. I backed up every file. I transferred them to a hidden folder on my laptop. Not because I was going to confront him yet, but because I needed evidence, not just for court, for myself. Because years from now, when the sadness tries to lie to me, when the loneliness comes dressed as nostalgia, I'll need to remember that this wasn't a love story gone stale. It was a lie that wore a ring. And I was done pretending it still fit. The night it all snapped was a Friday. The girls had just finished making chocolate chip cookies. burnt on the edges, undercooked in the middle, perfect by kid standards. Lily was icing hers with pink frosting, and Sophie had chocolate on her chin, laughing like the world still made sense. And for a moment, just a moment, I let myself pretend. Pretend we were still whole. Pretend Brian would walk in and wrap his arms around me from behind and kiss my neck like he used to. Pretend I hadn't seen the videos. Pretend I didn't know everything. Then the front door opened. He walked in like a man who still belonged here. Sophie ran to him. Lily didn't move. Brian kissed Sophie on the head, said something about traffic, and walked into the kitchen like he didn't have someone else's perfume on his collar. I said nothing, not because I didn't want to, but because I was waiting. Waiting for him to dig the hole himself. He looked around the kitchen, at the mess, the bowls, the flour on the counter, then at me. "Looks like chaos," he muttered, pouring himself a drink. "It's called childhood," I said evenly. He didn't laugh, just leaned against the fridge, sipping bourbon like it gave him courage. Then, out of nowhere, he said it. Right there in front of Lily. "Why don't you stop pretending, Emily? We both know you're not cut out for this anymore." I blinked. Lily looked up from her cookie, confused. Brian kept going. "Maybe if you took care of yourself the way you take care of this kitchen, I wouldn't have had to find attention somewhere else." The room froze. My heart didn't just drop. It shattered into dust I couldn't sweep up fast enough. I looked at Lily. Her hands had stopped moving. Her lips parted. She understood enough. Sophie said, "Daddy?" Brian set his glass down with a clink. "You want to tell them?" he asked, like he was tossing me a match after soaking the floor in gasoline. Or should I? I stepped in front of Lily, my voice low, sharp. "Get out." He smirked. "What, no apology for snooping?" I said, "Get out." He laughed. Laughed, like none of this was real, like none of this mattered. Then he turned and looked Lily in the eyes and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy still loves you. Even if Mommy's having one of her episodes." I don't remember picking up the glass, but I remember throwing it. It hit the wall behind him and exploded like my last ounce of restraint. "Out!" I screamed. He stared at me like he didn't recognize who I was. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. But Lily did. She stepped behind me and held my waist. Sophie started crying. Brian opened the door and left, slamming it behind him like punctuation. The house fell into a silence so thick it made my ears ring. I turned to Lily. Her face wasn't angry or sad. It was something worse. Aware. She knew. She didn't know the details, but she knew enough. She knew Daddy wasn't safe anymore. She knew Mommy was holding back an ocean. She reached up and touched my arm. "Is this why you've been sad?" she asked softly. I nodded, tears welling. "Are we gonna be okay?" I crouched down, pulled her and Sophie close, and whispered the only thing I could. "We have to be." I didn't sleep that night. The house was still, but not peaceful, just hollow, like something essential had been ripped from its walls, and now all that remained was echo and dust. Lily had fallen asleep in my bed, curled up like a question I didn't know how to answer. Sophie clung to her stuffed rabbit like it could explain things I couldn't find words for. And me? I just lay there, awake, eyes open, breathing through glass. At around 2:37 a.m., I got up and walked through the house like it was foreign terrain. The living room still smelled faintly of cookies and bourbon and tension. The broken glass from earlier had been swept up, but I could still feel its sharpness under my skin. I sat on the couch and stared at the spot where Brian had stood just hours before. The spot where he humiliated me, in front of my daughters, without flinching. There's a moment in every woman's life when she realizes she's no longer protecting a marriage. She's protecting herself, and I had reached mine. I walked to the kitchen drawer, the one we never really organized. Junk mail, paper clips, expired coupons, and something else. The business card of a divorce attorney my friend Olivia had slipped me 2 years ago. "Just in case," she had said with a sad smile. I used to keep it as a joke. Now it felt like a flare gun. I placed it on the kitchen table next to my laptop. Just seeing it there made my chest tighten. This wasn't a thought anymore. It was a plan. But plans come with consequences, and consequences come with fear. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was afraid of failing Lily and Sophie, of tearing their world apart, of turning into that mom, the one with court dates and supervised visits and awkward weekend exchanges in parking lots. But I was more afraid of them growing up thinking this was normal, that love meant swallowing humiliation, that safety meant silence, that fathers were allowed to wound mothers with words and leave before the bleeding started. So I sat there, in the kitchen where I used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, and I wrote down one word: enough. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't shouted, just ink on paper. But it was the most honest thing I'd written in years. It took me 3 days to dial the number. I kept the card on the fridge, wedged between Sophie's crayon drawing of our family, one I now realized had an extra smile that didn't belong, and Lily's A+ science quiz. A strange altar of what I was trying to protect. Every time I walked past it, I paused. Not because I was unsure, but because dialing it would make this real. And real meant I could never go back to pretending, but pretending had cost me enough. So, on a Monday morning, while the girls were at school and the house felt like a waiting room for a storm, I picked up the phone, sat at the dining table, and called the number. "Carter and Bloom Family Law, how can I help you?" The woman's voice was bright, too cheerful for the weight in my throat. "I need a consultation," I said. "Are you currently married?" "Yes." "Is there a history of abuse?" I hesitated, then, "Not the kind you can see." She paused like she understood. The appointment was set for Thursday at 10 a.m., just like that. 15 years of marriage, reduced to a 30-minute window. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from the feeling that I was finally touching the edge of my own freedom. Brian came home late that night. No apology, no eye contact. He moved through the house like a man who still believed he held the deed to its peace. I didn't say a word, not about the lawyer, not about the video still saved on my laptop. I just watched how he looked through me when he spoke, watched how he kissed our daughters goodnight like a man checking off a box. Watched how easily he fell asleep next to me, like my silence was still his shield. But it wasn't. Because something had shifted, something irreversible. I lay in the dark, listening to the rhythm of his breath, and whispered under mine, "You won't break me quietly." The kitchen was where we fell in love. Not at first, of course. At first it was just square footage and outdated tile, but over time it became something more. Where we laughed over cheap wine, danced barefoot on Sunday mornings, fought over paint colors, and kissed mid-argument just to feel close again. Now? It felt like a crime scene where no one had died. But something had. It had been 2 days since I made the call. Brian didn't know. He'd been unusually quiet. Not gentle, not remorseful, just less present. He'd been working late, or at least that's what he said. I didn't ask anymore. What was the point of catching a lie you already knew the shape of? The girls were at school. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every floorboard creak louder, every appliance hum like it's mocking you. I opened the fridge. Nothing but almond milk, leftover takeout, and half a bottle of white wine I no longer had the stomach for. I didn't feel hungry. I felt hollow. Still, I moved like routine demanded it. Took out eggs, toast, butter. I cooked because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The stove clicked to life. The pan sizzled. The smell of burnt edges filled the air before I even noticed the toast was overdone. I scraped it into the trash, stared at it for a moment. That blackened, useless piece of something once warm. It felt like a metaphor I didn't have the energy to unpack. I walked to the kitchen table, the one where we'd blown out birthday candles, helped with science projects, carved pumpkins, and argued about bedtime. I sat down and stared at the empty chair across from me. His chair. The cushion still had that faint indent where he leaned back with one leg crossed over the other like he owned time. There was a ring on the table, a faint circle from his whiskey glass. It hadn't even dried yet. He was here, in the house, in the air. But not in the marriage, not in me. And the worst part? I couldn't even grieve him like he was gone, because technically he wasn't. He still left his shoes by the door, still brushed his teeth in our bathroom, still existed in the family group chat with one-word replies and half-hearted thumbs-ups. But the man I married? He'd left long before Alyssa ever touched him. Maybe before I stopped dancing in this kitchen. Maybe before the baby weight never quite left. Maybe before I became the woman who planned every PTA bake sale and forgot what passion looked like. But he never told me he was leaving. He just started turning his back. And somewhere in the slow fade, I forgot to ask for more. I looked around the kitchen and saw all the versions of us that lived in these walls. The newlyweds, the new parents, the late-night snackers, the holiday hosts, the couple that once stayed up until 2 a.m., building a gingerbread house too elaborate for 2 grown adults. Now, just me, in a room that used to love us. And I realized something painfully clear. This house still remembered the woman I used to be, even if he didn't. The office didn't look like a place where marriages ended. It smelled like lavender and printer ink. The walls were light gray, almost too calm, like they were trying to convince you this wouldn't hurt as much as it did. There were glossy magazines on the coffee table, ones no one ever really read, next to a box of tissues already halfway used. I didn't belong here, but I also didn't belong in the life I had been living. A woman in her 50s stepped out from the hallway, blonde bob, red blazer, a kind face that didn't waste time. "Emily Carter?" I stood. She smiled gently. "I'm Dana Bloom. Come on back." Her office was small but uncluttered, efficient, the kind of space that had seen tears, rage, regret, and still managed to hold it all without judgment. I sat across from her and tried to keep my hands from trembling. "First of all," she said, "I'm sorry you're here. No one ever comes to me because things are going well." I nodded. She didn't ask how I was. Instead, she asked me when I knew. "When did you realize this wasn't working anymore?" I thought about it. There were so many tiny signs, but I answered honestly. "When he stopped looking at me like I was real." Donna nodded like she'd heard that one before. We went through the checklist. Marriage length, 2 children, both under 18, shared house, 1 mortgage, assets mostly in his name, infidelity, confirmed. Emotional manipulation, repeated. "Do you want to go for custody?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I want them safe. I want them steady. I want them home." Dana leaned back, tapping her pen gently on the desk. "You have leverage," she said. "But men like Brian, they fight dirty when they start losing control. So I'm going to ask you something, and I need the truth." I nodded. "Are you ready for this?" The weight of it settled in my chest. Court, depositions, witnesses, cross-examinations, the possibility of him twisting my words, painting me unstable, maybe even dragging the girls into it. But what was the alternative? Keep pretending? Keep sharing a home with a man who taught our daughters that betrayal came with a smile and a glass of whiskey? No, I was scared. But I was more scared of what staying would do to me, and to them. So I answered with the only truth I had left. "Yes, I'm ready." Dana smiled. "Good. Because from what I can tell, you've already survived the worst part." "What part's that?" "Still believing he loved you." I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Because somewhere in that office, between the stacks of papers and the scent of lavender, I realized I wasn't here to mourn my marriage. I was here to bury it. When I got home from Dana's office, the air felt different. Not because Brian was gone. He wasn't. His car was in the driveway. His jacket was on the hook. His presence still lingered in every corner of the house like a cigarette someone refused to put out, but I had changed. I wasn't the same woman who left that morning clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. I had come back with something sharper, not anger, not vengeance, just clarity. The girls were in their rooms. Sophie was humming, playing with her dolls. Lily had her earbuds in, lost in whatever playlist she used to block out the tension. They didn't ask where I'd been, and I didn't tell them. Not yet. Brian was in the garage, probably tinkering with the broken lawnmower he never actually fixed. I could hear the soft clink of tools. It used to be comforting, domestic, normal. Now it just felt like noise from a man trying to drown out his own guilt. I walked into the kitchen and opened my laptop. One by one, I started organizing everything. The screenshots, the messages, the date-stamped photos, the email receipts for hotel rooms booked for conferences that didn't exist. I labeled everything. Folder 1, Evidence. Folder 2, Custody. Folder 3, The Lies I Lived Through. I backed it all up, twice. Once on the cloud, once on a drive I would give Dana. I printed a few of the cleaner exchanges, not the explicit ones, but the ones that proved he had introduced Alyssa into the girls' lives without my knowledge. A selfie of her in the passenger seat, Lily's lunchbox in the back, a text that said, "Can't wait to meet them again, maybe this time without the wife." My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. I looked around the kitchen and felt a strange sense of power in the silence, like the house had seen everything and was finally ready to take my side. I grabbed my phone and opened the family group chat, the one Brian barely participated in unless he needed a schedule reminder. I stared at the keyboard, typed, deleted, typed again. Then I sent one line. "Things are going to change soon. I love you both so much." Lily saw it first. Thumbs up emoji. Sophie replied with a heart. Brian didn't respond. Of course he didn't, because he still thought I'd stay quiet, that my silence was submission, that my motherhood would keep me soft, docile, unwilling to blow everything up. But he forgot one thing. Mothers don't go quiet, not when their children are watching, not when the lie becomes louder than the love. That night, I tucked them in tighter than usual. Lily stared at me a second longer than she needed to. I saw something in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. She knew. She didn't know everything, but she knew enough to know that I wasn't breaking. I was becoming. It was Sunday afternoon when I texted her. Me. You free? Olivia. For you? Always. My place or yours? Me. Yours. No kids. No walls listening. I pulled into her driveway an hour later. The fall leaves had just begun to scatter across her lawn, orange and gold like fire left behind by trees too tired to keep pretending. Her porch smelled like cinnamon candles and eucalyptus, comfort and quiet strength, just like her. Olivia had been my best friend since college. She was the one who held my hair when I cried through a miscarriage, the one who stood beside me at my wedding, the one who never liked Brian, not hated, just knew. She opened the door before I could knock. No words, just open arms. I melted into her hug, the kind that said, "I've got you, no matter how broken you think you are." We sat in her kitchen. Tea, blankets, tissues untouched, for now. "I made the call," I said finally, my voice quieter than I expected. "To who?" "Divorce attorney. Her name's Dana. She wears red and doesn't flinch." Olivia smiled. "Good." I stared into my tea. The steam fogged my glasses. "He brought her into our house, Liv. Into our lives. She sat in the car with Lily's backpack behind her. She's been in the driveway, like I'm the stranger." Olivia didn't speak. She knew I wasn't done. "There's video, messages, the whole thing, and the worst part? He enjoyed hiding it, like it made him feel powerful." "Because it did," she said, calm, unshaken. "Men like Brian don't cheat because they're in love. They cheat because they're cowards who mistake deceit for dominance." I blinked hard. The tears finally came, not because she was wrong, but because she was so right. "I feel stupid," I whispered. She reached across the table and touched my hand. "Don't you dare." I saw the signs. I felt it for months. And I still stayed. I cooked. I kissed him goodnight. I let him humiliate me, Liv. No, she said firmly. You believed in him. That's not weakness, Em. That's loyalty. That's love. Don't confuse your goodness with gullibility. I covered my face and let the silence hold me. The kind of silence that feels sacred, not empty. When I finally looked up, she asked, "What now?" "I fight." "For what?" "For them," I said, thinking of Lily's quiet knowing and Sophie's little heart already asking questions I couldn't answer. "And for me." She smiled then, soft, but proud. "You forgot who you were, Emily." But I didn't. And now that you remember, he's got no idea what's coming. We talked for hours, about lawyers, custody, the way betrayal rewrites your sense of self. She didn't try to fix it. She just sat in it with me. That night, before I left, she handed me a small notebook. "For the nights you don't say it out loud," she said. On the first page, in her handwriting, were 5 words: "You are not the villain." I held it like a lifeline, because for the first time in weeks I realized I wasn't broken. I was becoming someone who wouldn't settle anymore. There's something sacred about writing a letter you never intend to send. No audience, no performance, just truth, raw, unfiltered, undressed. I opened Olivia's notebook that night. The girls were asleep, curled like commas in the quiet sentence of our broken house. The wind outside whispered against the windows like a reminder, "You're still here." I turned to a blank page and started writing. "Brian, I loved you. I need you to understand that first. Before all of this, before her, before the distance turned into silence and silence turned into contempt, I loved you. Not the way people love convenience, not the way someone loves what looks good on paper. I loved you in ways I didn't even know how to articulate. In the ache of early mornings, in the folding of your socks, in the way I memorized your laugh before I memorized our anniversary. I chose you. And you played me. You didn't just cheat. You didn't just lie. You invited her into the life we built and made yourself at home in the destruction. You touched her with the same hands that once held our newborn daughter. You kissed her with the same mouth that promised me forever. And then you stood in our kitchen, and looked me in the eye like I was the one who failed. You turned your guilt into ammunition. You used my kindness as camouflage. But here's the thing you didn't count on. I may have lost you, but I found myself in the process. In the mirror, where my reflection finally looks like a woman who stopped apologizing. In my daughter's eyes, where they now see a mother who doesn't fold when it gets hard. She fights. In every breath I take that doesn't taste like your name anymore. I don't hate you. Not because you don't deserve it, but because hate still gives you space inside me, and I've cleared you out. Room by room, lie by lie, memory by memory. So no, you'll never read this. But I needed to write it, because closure isn't something you hand to someone. It's something you write with your own pen. Emily, I closed the notebook. Tears hadn't come this time, not because I was numb, but because I was finished. I tore the letter out slowly and fed it into the fireplace. Watched the edges curl, blacken, and drift into smoke like a spell finally broken. The silence afterward was warm, not empty, not haunted, just mine. Brian came home late again. No text, no excuse, no apology. Just the sound of his keys in the door, his shoes kicked off carelessly like nothing in the world had shifted. He moved through the house like he still had a place in it, like I hadn't already started carving him out of it. Slowly, silently, the way you remove mold before it spreads. I was waiting in the living room. No makeup, no wine, no carefully practiced speech. Just me, in a sweatshirt and bare feet, surrounded by stacks of manila folders and photocopied truths. He barely glanced at them. "What's all this?" I looked at him, really looked, the man I had once loved more than myself. The man I married under a sky full of stars, believing we were going to write forever together. and now forever had teeth. "Sit," I said. He didn't move. "Brian." "Sit." Something in my voice cut through him. Not volume, finality. He sat. I slid the first folder across the table. "Evidence," I said. "Screenshots, messages, dates, times, locations. A record of every moment you thought I was too distracted folding laundry to notice." He flipped it open, glanced at the first few pages, then shut it. He didn't deny it. Of course he didn't. "What do you want?" he asked. I blinked. "Excuse me?" He leaned back, arms crossed. "You've made your point. You're angry. You have receipts. So what now? You want revenge?" I almost laughed. "No, Brian. I want freedom. I want peace. And I want our daughters to grow up knowing that love doesn't look like this." He scoffed. "You really think you'll win in court?" "I don't need to win," I said. "I just need the truth to breathe. And it's already halfway out the door." His eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." I stood. "Try me." He stood too. We were face to face now, close enough that I could still smell the scent of someone else's perfume clinging to his collar. It wasn't Alyssa's. I realized then there was probably more than one. "You're throwing away everything," he said. "No," I replied, voice calm. "You did. The night you brought another woman into our life. The day you stood in front of our daughters and disrespected me like I wasn't still the reason this house didn't collapse." He opened his mouth to say something cruel. I saw it coming, but I beat him to it. Don't say it. Because here's the truth, Brian. I gave you my youth, my trust, my body, my loyalty, and you gave me doubt, disease, and 1,000 empty apologies." He looked stunned. "Good." I stepped back and reached for the final folder. The divorce papers. Already signed, already filed. His name just needed to go on the dotted line. "You'll be served officially soon," I said, "but I figured I'd give you the courtesy of knowing." His voice was low now, unsure. "And the girls?" I softened just slightly, because they were the only part of this we'd done right, and even that was fading. "They're mine," I said, "not out of ownership, out of presence, because I'm the one who's here. I'm the one who knows what kind of cereal Sophie hates and what song Lily listens to on repeat when she's sad." He sat down. Not out of compliance, out of defeat. He looked small. Not because I'd made him that way, because he finally saw what he'd lost. But it didn't matter, because I wasn't here to watch him crumble. I was here to walk away. And when I closed the door behind me that night, left him alone in the house that no longer felt like mine, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally knew. The fire didn't kill me. It revealed what could survive it. The first thing I did was buy new sheets. Not because the old ones were torn or stained or ruined, they were just tainted. With memory, with silence, with skin that no longer belonged to me. It wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was reset. Soft gray cotton, clean, crisp, unshared. I stripped the bed without ceremony. No music, no crying. Just me and the rhythm of letting go. As I folded the old ones, I realized I had memorized the creases. I knew which pillowcase had the tiny fray in the corner, which part of the fitted sheet never quite stayed on. How strange, I thought, the things we know better than ourselves. By the time the new sheets were on, the room looked brighter. Or maybe I did. That same afternoon, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, the one that held things I hadn't touched in years, watercolors, a sketch pad, a journal that still smelled faintly of lavender and dust, pieces of a woman I used to be. I sat on the floor like I was back in college again, legs folded beneath me, brush in hand, blank page in front of me. No plan, no perfection, just color, just movement, just presence. I painted a sky, not because I was hopeful, but because I missed the horizon. The house was quiet, Not like before, when it was the kind of silence that made you ache. This time, it felt like space, breathing room, a home exhaling for the first time in years. The girls came home to the smell of grilled cheese and fresh sheets. Sophie dropped her backpack and yelled, "It smells like a hotel in here!" Lily gave me that look, the one where she pretends not to notice the changes, but does. She notices everything. That night, after they went to bed, I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth and caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked new, not glowing, not radiant, but real. There were still bags under my eyes, a small wrinkle I hadn't noticed before near my lip. My hair needed washing, but I didn't look lost. For the first time in months, maybe years, I didn't see a woman waiting to be chosen. I saw a woman choosing herself. It was a Tuesday, ordinary by all accounts. I'd just picked up the girls from school. Sophie was singing in the back seat, making up a song about gummy bears and unicorns. Lily was quiet. Not sulking, just thinking. The kind of quiet she inherited from me. The kind that means a storm is building, not because of mood, but meaning. When we got home, I started on dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with garlic bread. The girls were at the table doing homework. Sophie was coloring her spelling words. Lily was staring out the window. "Lils?" I asked. She blinked, turned back to her worksheet, then, without looking up, asked the question I had been dreading since the night it all fell apart. "Do you still love Dad?" The room went silent. Even Sophie stopped humming. The pasta boiled over slightly. I didn't move. I wanted to lie, to say yes, but it's complicated. To say love doesn't just disappear. To say something soft enough not to shake her world more than it already had been, but I didn't. I dried my hands, sat across from her, looked her straight in the eyes. "No, baby," I said gently. "I don't. Not the way I used to." Her face didn't crumble. It didn't even flinch. She nodded slowly, absorbing it like she already knew, like she'd known for a while. "Okay," she said. "I just wanted to know." Sophie looked between us, confused. "But he's still our daddy, right?" "Of course," I said. "Nothing changes that. Ever." "But he doesn't live here anymore," she said, her little brow furrowed. "No," I said, choosing each word like a thread I was afraid might snap. "Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that aren't good for the people they love. And when that happens, we have to make different choices. To keep each other safe. To keep things honest." Lily's eyes filled with something I couldn't name. Not sadness, not anger. Understanding. The kind kids are never supposed to carry, but somehow do. "I think I knew," she whispered. "Before." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm sorry you had to." She squeezed back. "I'm not. It made me grow up a little. But I still wish you didn't have to do it alone." I smiled, tears burning behind my eyes. "I'm not alone," I said. And I wasn't. Because even on the nights I cried into a pillow or stared too long into my coffee, I had them. These two girls. These quiet warriors with soft hearts and sharper eyes than I ever gave them credit for. That night, I made the garlic bread extra crispy, just how Lily liked it. She ate 2 slices. Sophie ate 4. We didn't talk about Brian again, but after I tucked them into bed, Lily called out to me, "Mom? Yeah? You're really strong, you know." I turned to her, standing in the doorway with a blanket draped over one arm, and smiled through the ache in my throat. "So are you." And for the first time in this whole storm of unraveling and rebuilding, I didn't just say it. I believed it. There was still one piece of him left in the house. Not the suit jacket hanging behind the door, or the mug he always used for coffee, not the drawer in the hallway I still hadn't cleared, or the scent of his cologne that stubbornly clung to the closet. It was the photo on the mantel, us, in Maui, honeymoon smiles, sand in our hair, his arms around my waist like he knew what to protect. I'd walked past it 100 times since the world shifted. Sometimes I stared at it. Sometimes I ignored it. but I never touched it, because some things hurt more in silence than they do in fire. That morning, the girls were at school. The house was still. Outside, the trees were shedding faster, like even the season was trying to let go. I stood in front of the mantel, coffee cooling in my hand, and finally faced the photo. Really saw it. And what struck me wasn't the love we once had. It was the version of me in that picture, the way I leaned into him, the way my eyes didn't question anything, the way I thought a ring and a promise were stronger than reality. She was beautiful, and she was naive. I didn't hate her for that, but I couldn't be her anymore. I set the coffee down, took the frame in both hands. It was heavier than I remembered, maybe because of everything it now carried. I sat down on the couch and flipped it over. Behind the glass was a note, tucked in years ago, back when we thought we were still in the business of surprises. To my forever, I can't wait to grow old with you. Brian. I exhaled. Not in pain, not in grief, just in release. I tore the note down the middle, then again. The photo followed. Not with rage, not with regret, just resolve. I placed the broken pieces in a shoebox along with a few other things I wasn't ready to burn, not out of sentiment, but because sometimes healing means cataloging your ghosts before you set them free. I vacuumed the dust from the mantel, and for the first time in months, the space above the fireplace didn't feel empty. It felt open. That night, when the girls asked where the photo had gone, I simply said, "Some memories belong to the past, but we're making new ones now." It wasn't a date. That's what I told Olivia, who smirked as she poured wine and rolled her eyes like a sister who knew better. "It's coffee," I insisted. "Not a candlelit dinner. No violin, no pressure." "It's a first step," she said, handing me the glass. "You're allowed to take it." I stared at the invitation on my phone. Jack, 5:30 at the Nest Cafe? Just coffee. No expectations. Jack was a parent at Sophie's school, widower, quiet, kind. The kind of man who always helped put away chairs after PTA meetings without needing applause. We'd talked a few times, short conversations, nothing charged, nothing flirty. But there was something in his eyes, not desire, recognition, the kind of look that says, "I've been in the fire too." I stood in front of my closet that afternoon longer than I should have. Not because I needed to look perfect, but because I wanted to feel like me again. I picked a soft navy sweater, jeans that actually fit right, and boots I forgot I owned. No lipstick, just mascara and a little courage. The Nest Cafe smelled like cinnamon and second chances. It was warm, crowded, and noisy in a way that made it easier to breathe. Jack stood when he saw me. He didn't try too hard. No awkward compliments, no performative chivalry, just a soft smile and an honest, "Hey, I'm glad you came." We ordered, sat by the window, talked, about our kids, about how hard mornings are when you're doing it alone, about how some days silence feels like freedom, and others, like grief. He didn't ask about Brian, and I didn't ask about the woman he lost. We weren't there to trade wounds, just to share the space between them. At one point, I laughed, really laughed, at something he said about Sophie's class hamster escaping and ending up in the principal's office, and it felt good. Not thrilling, not electric, but honest. At the end, he walked me to my car. "I'd like to do this again," he said, voice low. I smiled. Not coy, not promising, just real. "Maybe," I said. "One moment at a time." He nodded. "That's all we've got anyway." And then he stepped back. No hug, no pressure, just space. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for weeks. Not because I was falling, but because I wasn't. Because I'd walked into a room without my armor, and it didn't kill me. Because for the first time since Brian, I let someone see me. And I didn't shrink. I drove home under a dusky sky, the girls already in pajamas when I walked in. Sophie hugged me like I'd been gone for days. Lily raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I didn't replay every word Jack said. I just held on to one quiet thought. Maybe there's life after survival. Maybe there's even love. But for now, there's me. And for once, that feels like enough. There was nothing remarkable about that morning. No court dates, no phone calls from lawyers, no passive-aggressive texts from Brian, just sunlight coming through the kitchen window and the smell of pancakes. Sophie was coloring at the table, humming something out of tune. Lily was still upstairs, probably scrolling through whatever middle schoolers scroll through now, too old for cartoons, too young for detachment. I stood at the stove, flipping pancakes, my hair in a messy bun, wearing a sweatshirt older than both of my daughters. I wasn't dressed for anyone. I wasn't performing. I wasn't chasing worth in the reflection of someone else's gaze. I was here, in my kitchen, in my body, in my breath. The radio played softly in the background, Fleetwood Mac, I think. And as I poured another circle of batter into the pan, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I paused. It wasn't dramatic. No tears, no cinematic realization, just recognition. I saw the lines near my eyes, the scar on my chin I got from falling off a bike at 13, the way my mouth curved slightly down when I wasn't smiling, something Brian used to call your worry face. But I wasn't worried, not this time, because I didn't see a woman unraveling. I saw a woman reclaimed, not flawless, not perfect, but real. A woman who survived being invisible, who walked through fire without becoming ash, who taught her daughters, without even meaning to, what it looks like to fall apart and put yourself back together with your own hands. I flipped the last pancake onto the plate and whispered to my own reflection, I am still here. Not as the version he chose, not as the woman I bent myself into to keep the peace, but as the version I chose. The one who stayed when everyone else walked away. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Mommy, why are you smiling at the window? I turned back to her. Just reminding myself of something, I said, placing the plate in front of her. What? That I'm doing okay? She nodded, her mouth already full of syrup-drenched pancake. You're more than okay. You're awesome. And maybe, for the first time, I believed it. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, no warning. Just a cream-colored packet slipped through the mail slot like any other delivery, as if the end of a marriage belonged in the same stack as grocery ads and dentist reminders. I knew what it was before I even picked it up. Divorce decree. Final, filed, stamped, done. I held it in my hands like it might explode, not because it hurt, not anymore, but because it felt too light for something that once meant everything. 15 years, 2 kids, 100 holidays, 1,000 arguments. 3. I love yous that still echo when the house gets too quiet, all reduced to 9 pages of legal language and my maiden name restored. I sat at the kitchen table, the same place I'd signed permission slips and birthday cards and apology notes to myself I never mailed. The sun cast long shadows across the floor, catching on Sophie's sneakers and Lily's forgotten earbuds. I read every word, not because I didn't trust it, but because I needed to read it, to see the ending. Page 6. Custody. Joint, but primary residence with me. Page 7. Property. I kept the house. Page 9. Sign here. I picked up the pen, and I paused, not because I doubted, but because I remembered. I remembered the way he looked at me in the back of our wedding chapel, mouthing, "You're everything," like it was a vow. I remembered the first time he saw Lily, crying harder than the baby in his arms. I remembered him kissing my shoulder when I couldn't sleep, tracing circles on my skin and whispering, "I've got you." And then I remembered the silence, the lies, the texts, the smell of someone else's perfume on my pillow. I remembered her sitting in his passenger seat while our daughter's backpack sat in the back, and just like that, the weight lifted. I signed my name, and it felt clean. Not celebratory, not tragic, just true. I stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into the envelope, sealed it with fingers that didn't tremble. Later that night, I told the girls gently, "We're officially divorced," I said. "It's done." Lily nodded, older than her age in the way she absorbed it. Sophie asked if we could still eat pizza on Fridays. I told her absolutely yes. And that night, I didn't cry. Instead, I lit a candle in the living room, took a bath, and slid into bed with a book I wasn't reading to escape, but to enjoy. There was no one in the other half of the bed, no apology, no betrayal, no body that didn't love me back. Just space, clean sheets, and a woman who'd signed the end, not because she was broken, but because she was free. The house was warm with the smell of garlic and tomato sauce, not store-bought this time, real. I'd chopped the onions, sautéed the garlic, let the sauce simmer like I had nowhere to be, because I didn't. Not tonight. Not anymore. The girls sat at the kitchen table, coloring placemats I printed from the internet. Sophie had made hers into a rainbow. Lily was carefully shading her name into a galaxy. There was no chaos, no tension, no one missing. Just us. I stirred the spaghetti, humming something from the radio. I hadn't played music while cooking in months, not since before the unraveling, when noise felt like a cover for everything I didn't want to feel. But now it felt like the soundtrack of something new. I plated the food with a little too much effort, not to impress anyone. Just because I wanted this dinner to mean something. I placed the dishes on the table, sat across from the girls, and exhaled. "This looks fancy," Sophie said, twirling noodles around her fork. "It's spaghetti," Lily deadpanned. "The bar's not that high." We all laughed. It wasn't forced. It wasn't the kind of laugh that tries to chase away sadness. It was real, simple, present. Halfway through dinner, Sophie asked the question. Not heavy, not painful, just curious. "Is Daddy coming back?" I paused, set my fork down. "No, baby," I said softly. "Daddy doesn't live here anymore." "Is he still my daddy?" "Always." She thought about that for a second, nodded, then, with the blunt wisdom of a 7-year-old, said, "Good, but I like it better when it's just us." Lily didn't say anything. She just smiled a little, eyes still focused on her plate. I smiled too, not because I agreed or disagreed, but because we were okay. Not healed, not whole, but okay. After dinner, we did the dishes together. Sophie dried. Lily loaded the dishwasher like it was a puzzle only she could solve. We played music louder this time, a silly pop song they both knew, and danced a little in the kitchen. I twirled Sophie around like she was 4 again. Lily rolled her eyes, but I saw the grin she tried to hide. Later, after they went to bed, I stood in the doorway of their room. They were both asleep, soft, breathing in rhythm. 2 pieces of my heart still learning how to beat without him. I didn't cry, I didn't ache. I just stood there, hand on the frame, and whispered, "We're going to be okay. Better than okay." Because we weren't rebuilding a life that had been destroyed. We were building something new, brick by brick, meal by meal, laugh by laugh. And tonight, it started with spaghetti. It's funny how peace sneaks up on you. You don't notice it arriving. There's no announcement, no fireworks, no moment where everything magically makes sense. It just shows up. Slowly. Softly. And one day you realize the weight you've been carrying isn't there anymore. That morning, I sat on the porch with a mug of black coffee. No cream, no sugar, just strong and honest. And the air was crisp, autumn folding into winter, but the cold didn't bother me like it used to. The girls were still asleep upstairs. The house was quiet, but not empty. There was laundry in the dryer, a science project on the table, dishes in the sink. It was lived in. It was ours. Brian hadn't called in weeks. Alyssa had disappeared completely, maybe onto someone else's stage, maybe off the map. And Jack? He was still around, patient, kind, never pushing. But this chapter? It wasn't about him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was about me, about learning to sit in silence without trying to fill it, about looking in the mirror and not flinching, about raising 2 girls who now knew that love wasn't supposed to hurt, and leaving wasn't failure, but courage. I watched the sun rise over the edge of the neighborhood rooftops, a soft gold light spilling across the street like forgiveness, and I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the unraveling, the courtroom tension, the letter I never sent, the photo I tore apart, the pancakes, the garlic bread, the night I didn't cry. There was a time I thought the slap of truth, of betrayal, had broken me. But it hadn't. It cracked me open. And that's the thing about cracks. It's where the light gets in. The front door creaked open behind me. Sophie stepped out in her pajamas, hair wild, dragging her bunny by one floppy ear. She crawled into my lap without saying a word. We sat there, the two of us wrapped in a blanket of mourning, the world still quiet and undecided. She looked up at me, half asleep, and said, "Are we still rebuilding?" I smiled, kissed the top of her head. "We are. Are we almost done?" I thought about that for a second. Then I whispered, "No, sweet girl, but we're so much further than where we started." She nodded, and just like that, she was asleep again. In my arms, in our home, in a life that wasn't perfect, but finally felt like it was mine. I used to think survival looked like holding everything together. Turns out, it looks more like letting go of the lies, letting go of the version of me who needed his approval to feel whole, letting go of the weight I was never meant to carry. The woman I am now doesn't beg for love. She chooses peace. She doesn't chase closure. She creates it. Some nights are still hard. Some memories still sting. But they don't own me anymore. They're just pages I've turned. Chapters that no longer define the ending. Because this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a life that doesn't hurt to live. And maybe one day someone will love me again, fully, honestly, without betrayal in their back pocket. But even if they don't, I am no longer waiting to be chosen. I already chose myself.